The human shared her blanket. Dr. Sarah Chen had been stationed on the Valorian research vessel for 3 months now, the only human among a crew of 47 aliens. The Valorians were a proud warrior species, standing nearly 8 feet tall with obsidian scales and eyes that glowed amber in dim light. They had conquered 17 star systems before deciding that science might be more interesting than war. Sarah had been brought aboard as part of an interspecies exchange program, though she suspected the Valorians were more curious about studying her than working with her. The ship's common area was cold. It was always cold. The Valorians kept the temperature at what they considered comfortable, which was somewhere around 45 degrees Fahrenheit. Sarah had complained once politely, and Captain Vexthor had looked at her with genuine confusion. His species had evolved on a frozen moon orbiting a gas giant. This was warm to them, so Sarah wore 3 layers and carried her blanket everywhere. It was a thick, soft thing she had brought from Earth, woven with geometric patterns in blue and gold. The Valorians found this amusing. Commander Crix had once remarked that only weak species needed artificial warmth. Sarah had smiled and said nothing, wrapping the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Everything changed the day the Cubs arrived. The ship had responded to a distress signal from a damaged cargo vessel drifting near an asteroid field. When the boarding team returned, they brought back 3 small creatures that looked like miniature versions of the Valorians, but with softer scales and oversized eyes. They were cubs, no more than 2 or 3 years old in human terms, orphaned when their transport was attacked by raiders. Captain Vexthor stood in the cargo bay, his massive arms crossed, staring down at the shivering cubs with obvious discomfort. Valorian culture did not celebrate softness. Cubs were expected to be strong, independent, fierce from birth. These 3 were crying, making high-pitched, keening sounds that echoed off the metal walls. Sarah pushed through the circle of crew members to get a closer look. The cubs were huddled together in the corner, their small bodies trembling. Their scales, which should have been glossy black like adult Valorians, were dull gray, and their amber eyes were wide with terror. "What will you do with them?" Sarah asked. "Return them to the nearest Valorian colony," Vexthor said. "It will take 4 days to reach it." "They're freezing," Sarah observed. She could see frost forming on the tips of their small claws. "They will endure," the captain said firmly. "It builds character." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, then at the cubs. One of them, the smallest, had stopped crying and was simply staring at nothing, its body shaking uncontrollably. She recognized shock when she saw it. These children had watched their family die. They were traumatized, terrified, and cold. Without asking permission, Sarah walked over to the cubs. The adults around her tensed, hands moving toward weapons. Valorian cubs were still predators, after all, capable of inflicting serious damage with their claws and teeth. But Sarah had worked with enough species to read body language. These cubs were not aggressive. They were broken. She sat down on the cold floor about 3 feet away from them, moving slowly. The cubs watched her with wary eyes. Sarah unwrapped her blanket from her shoulders and held it out, not approaching, just offering. "It's okay," she said softly. "You're safe now." The largest cub, a female Sarah would later learn was named Zara, took a tentative step forward. She sniffed the air, her nostrils flaring. Then she looked at the blanket with obvious interest. Sarah gently tossed it toward them, letting it land just within reach. What happened next would become a story told across multiple star systems. The moment the blanket landed, all 3 cubs lunged for it simultaneously. Within seconds, they were tangled together in a writhing ball of scales, claws, and desperate grabbing. Each one had locked onto a corner of the blanket and was refusing to let go, even as they climbed over each other, hissing and snapping. The Valorian crew members stepped back in alarm, but Sarah started laughing. It was such a normal, childlike response. They weren't fighting to hurt each other. They were fighting because the blanket was warm and soft and wonderful, and each of them wanted it desperately. "Stop! You can all share it," Sarah said, still laughing. The cubs froze, looking at her with confusion. Sharing was not a concept young Valorians understood instinctively. Their culture was built on strength, on taking what you could hold. Sarah stood and walked over slowly. The cubs tensed, but did not release the blanket. She knelt down and gently untangled them, spreading the blanket out flat on the floor. Then she guided each cub to sit on it, showing them that there was enough room for all three. For a moment they sat separately, each on their own section of fabric. Then the smallest one, a male with a scar already forming across his snout, made a soft sound and moved closer to his siblings. Within seconds, all three were huddled together in the center of the blanket, their small bodies pressed against each other, finally beginning to relax. Sarah wrapped the edges of the blanket around them, creating a small nest. The cubs looked up at her with something like wonder. Their shaking had stopped. The smallest one made a soft chirping sound and reached out with one tiny claw to touch Sarah's hand. Behind her, the cargo bay was completely silent. Sarah turned to see 47 Valorian warriors staring at her with expressions she could not quite read. Captain Vex Thor's amber eyes were very wide. "Your species does this?" he asked quietly. "Gives warmth to young that are not your own?" "Yes," Sarah said simply. "It's what humans do." Over the next 4 days, the cubs rarely left Sarah's side. She carried her blanket to wherever she worked, and they would curl up nearby, watching her with devoted attention. The Valorian crew members observed this with growing fascination. Several admitted they had never seen cubs so calm, so trusting. The cubs still fought over the blanket corners sometimes, but now it was playful, more like a game. They had learned they could share. They had learned that warmth did not have to be seized and hoarded, that it could be given freely and still be enough for everyone. On the 3rd day, Zara brought Sarah a piece of synthetic meat from her meal, offering it solemnly. It was the greatest treasure a cub had to give. Sarah accepted it with equal solemnity, understanding the honor being given to her. When they finally reached the Valorian colony, the cubs did not want to leave the ship. They clung to Sarah, making distressed sounds. The colony representatives, stern adults in formal armor, seemed baffled by this display of emotion. Cubs were supposed to be strong. Sarah knelt down and looked each cub in the eyes. "You're going to be okay," she told them. "You're brave and strong and good. Remember that you can be fierce and kind. Remember that warmth is meant to be shared." She unwrapped her blanket and gave it to them. The colony representatives protested, saying cubs did not need such things, but Captain Vex Thor silenced them with a gesture. "The human has taught them something we forgot," he said. "Let them keep it." As the ship prepared to depart, Sarah stood at the observation window and watched the cubs in the colony's welcome center below. They had spread the blanket out and were sitting together on it, just as she had shown them. Other cubs were approaching cautiously, and Zara was making room for them, showing them that there was space enough if they did not fight. Captain Vexithor came to stand beside Sarah. "The council wants to study this," he said. "This human behavior of caring for young that are not your own." "It's not really something you can study," Sarah said. "It's just something you do. We are warriors. We are conquerors. We are scientists," Vex Thor said slowly. "But watching you with those cubs, I realized we have forgotten how to be kind." He paused, his massive scaled hand reaching out to very gently touch her shoulder. "Thank you for reminding us." News of the human and the blanket spread through Valorian space like wildfire. Other species heard the story and shared their own versions. The image of a small human woman teaching predator cubs to share warmth became a symbol of something larger, something the galaxy had been missing. Humanity had not conquered star systems. They had not developed the fastest ships or the strongest weapons, but they had something that made them unique in the vast darkness of space. They had the instinct to comfort the frightened, to warm the cold, to share what little they had with those who had nothing. And sometimes, in a universe that could be harsh and unforgiving, that was the most powerful thing of all. Sarah kept her other blankets, but she never forgot the cubs. She heard later that Zara had grown up to become a colony leader, known for her unusual compassion and her insistence that all cubs be treated with gentleness. The first law she passed required that every public space have soft places where young ones could rest together. They called them sharing corners, and in the center of each one was a blanket.